my people? Today in this video, we're going to be talking about domain and range. And I'm going to give you guys some pointers on how to tell what the domain and range is. Then we're going to look at some examples. And then I'm going to give you some star released examples to see if you understood what the concepts were, and also to prepare you for what you're going to see on the STAR test. And if you're watching this video, the STAR test is the state test here in Texas. All right, so domain and range. So let's start with domain. Domain. The key part of domain, anytime we're talking about domain, we're talking about X. And anytime we're talking about range, we're talking about Y. And then on domain, we're looking for your domain. We're looking left to right. And we're looking from the farthest left to the furthest right. And then range, we're looking from the lowest point to the highest point. Because on the coordinate grid, your X values here. This is your Y-axis. And if you were to keep going down here, this is negative infinity. Up here will be positive infinity. If you go way to the right and keep going, this will be positive infinity. And down here will be negative infinity on the X, okay? So those are four things. So positive infinity, positive infinities, and then you got, let's make this bigger, negative infinity, negative infinities, okay? All right, so again, domain is anything that has to do with X. Range is anything that has to do with Y. Domain, we're looking furthest left to furthest right. And range, we're looking at the lowest point to the highest point. All right. There will be times that they won't have a highest point or a lowest point or all that good stuff. And we're going to talk about that here really soon. And then the next thing, what we need to do is I'm going to point out a few things that we have to identify. Sometimes we'll have to identify. So whenever we have these two symbols, remember when you were graphing one-step inequalities, that's open circles. Those are closed circles. Well, in inequalities, or when you're doing a domain and range, it's always going to be this way. It could be like this. And any combination of those two. All right. Anytime you have these, remember, this is, again, it's going to be a closed circle. And anytime you have without the line under it, it's going to be an open circle. So anytime you see an open circle, that's going to cause you to have the less than symbols with no line under it. Anytime you have the line under it, or anytime you see a closed circle, then you're going to have the lines under it. All right, so this less than symbol without the line under it only happens on two circumstances. Only happens when two things happen. Two. You either have to have one, an open circle, or two, arrows. Okay? These are the only two times that you will see one of those without the equal to sign. Every other time, use the equal to sign when you're doing domain and range. All right? Let's go ahead and take a look at some examples. So for the domain, we got to go furthest left to furthest right. So if I were to draw a line to my furthest left point, it will be right here. And then my furthest right, there's an arrow here. So that tells me something. Okay. So let's see what that means. So for my domain, let's start off by putting domain. Let's go put the X. And then because there's an open circle on the left, it's going to be one of those. And because there's an arrow on the right, it's going to be that symbol. So start there, put your X. Figure out what symbols go to the left and what symbol goes to the right. Now, what is the furthest left this thing goes? And that furthest left is -7. And the furthest right is infinity. Arrows means infinity on that side. Okay? Now, we really, you really don't want to use this infinity thing. So what if I took it off and I could actually rewrite this? Because when we talk about inequalities and stuff like that, it's better, it's easier to read when you have variable, symbol, number in that order. So we want the X on the left, the symbol in the middle, number on the left. Now it's important that since we flipped the whole thing, that this right here flips as well. All right. So this is my domain. X is greater than -7. And if you look at the graph, the whole line, all those pictures, the line is on all the numbers greater than 7. So that makes sense. So let's figure out what the range is. Range is the lowest point. This is the lowest right there. And my highest point. Well, this seems to be the highest, but it's not. Because this arrow, now what does this arrow mean? It means it's going to keep going and going and going and going all the way up to positive infinity. So my range, we're going to start at Y. Now, is there an open circle or an arrow right here? The answer is no. So that's going to be closed. And on the right-hand side, since there's an arrow, it's going to be open. What's the lowest this thing goes? -2. The highest it goes is positive infinity. Again, we don't want to write infinity in our answer because, there's no way to really write that. So we're going to take this off. And again, this is backwards. So we're going to flip it so it looks like this. Now, I will say that the first way, this other way of writing it, like this right here, it's technically correct, but most teachers would prefer it, variable, symbol, and then number. Okay, let's do another one. We're going to do a couple of these. Ooh, look at fancy smancy. All right, let's look at it. Let's see. What's the furthest left this thing goes? So before we do that, let's go ahead and start by doing domain. I'm going to put my X, and then my range is going to be Y. All right, so my domain, let's look at the furthest left. It's going to go here. And my furthest left is at -6, and there's a closed dot, which means I'm going to have that symbol, the equal to symbol on the bottom. What's the furthest right this thing goes? +7. And there's a closed dot on that. So that is my domain. And let's figure out what the range is. Let's go with range. What's the lowest this goes? Looks like this picture, the lowest it goes would be right here. What is that, -3? Is there an open circle or an arrow right there? Nah, so that means it's going to have the equal to sign under it. And then what's the highest point this thing goes? It looks like the highest this goes is right through here. The highest it goes is 6. And then is there an open circle or an arrow there? No. So that's the symbol that goes with it. So we got to go the lowest, furthest left, way down here. Furthest right, way over here. Lowest point there, highest point there. Okay, let's keep going. That was number 2. Number 3. Domain. Let's look at the domain. And we're going to do the range. So let's look at this domain thing. What's the furthest left it goes? There's an arrow down there, which means, and it's an arrow on the left-hand side. Remember that this is -infinity over here. This is positive infinity this way, if you keep going. And on the range, this is positive infinity up there, negative infinity down here. So because the furthest left this thing is going to go is negative infinity, Wrong color. And remember, arrows trigger that. We're not going to use no underline. And domain is always X. What's the furthest right this thing goes? Positive infinity. What symbol goes to infinity? That one. So in other words, my domain is all real numbers. And this symbol is that. So in other words, there are no numbers from negative infinity to positive infinity that domain is not. Okay, so this is all real numbers. All right, now let's look at the range. What's the lowest it goes? Well, the lowest it goes is down this way because this is still going to continue to go down. So that's going to be negative infinity. And then remember that infinity symbols trigger just the less than, no equal to, y. And then it's going to go, the highest is going to go positive infinity. And then it's going to trigger that. So again, from negative infinity to positive infinity, it's all real numbers. What does that mean? That our domain and range are both all real numbers. Anytime you have a straight line and there's arrows on the end, your domain and range will both be all real numbers. That's a good thing to kind of like memorize, FYI. Let's do another one. Now this one is interesting. Let's figure out what this domain is. Let's figure out what the range is. And remember, domain is X. So what's the furthest left this goes? Well, you'd be like, well, -3, I guess. Is there an open circle or infinity symbol? Nah. And you're like, okay. I'm like, what's the furthest right it goes? It's still -3. What does this mean right here? It means that the only number that X is this whole time, -3. There is no number, there are no other numbers that X touches except -3. So that's my domain. And my range is my lowest point. What's the lowest this thing goes? Let's go take a look. Let's go look down here. Oh, there's an arrow. That means it's negative infinity. Anytime you have infinity, that's a less than. Range is Y. What's the highest it goes? Right there. Close dot. And the highest it goes is 4. But, you know, again, we don't want this infinity symbol. And here we try to get rid of all of those. So my range is Y is greater. Sorry, my Y is less than or equal to 4. And then my domain is X is equal to -3. Not too bad. So, yeah, that's how we do those so far. Okay. Let's look at another one because it's really important that y'all grasp these. So let's do domain. And let's do range. So domain, what's the furthest left this thing goes? Let's look as far left as we can look. There's an arrow there. If there's an arrow there, that's an infinity symbol. And on that side, it's negative infinity. Negative infinity means I have to have that. And since it's domain, we're talking about the X. What's the furthest right this goes? Right over here. That is going to be 6. And because it's a closed dot, that's less than or equal to 6 sign. And then again, we don't really want to write infinity symbols in our work. That can go away. So our domain is less than or equal to 6. Because it's already in the correct order, we don't have to flip it. Let's look at our range. What's the lowest this thing goes? -3. And there are no open circles or arrows there. So it's going to be an equal to symbol under there. And again, range is always Y. Now, what's the highest it goes? And again, we have to figure out where this arrow is going to go. And this is going to continue to go up and up, which means we're going to have an infinity on this side, which means we'll just have a less than. Well, we don't want this in an infinity thing. That goes away. And this is out of order Because it's out of order, we need to flip it. So y, everything flips, and this is my range for that one. And then my range for this one, I'm sorry, my domain is going to be for that one. Okay? And one more of these type, and then we'll get into tables and all that good stuff. All right, so domain. At this point in the video, I would like for you to pause it. And I want you to tell me what you think the domain and range is. And then when you're ready, unpause it and see if you get the same thing I got. So go ahead and pause the video now. Now that you've had the chance to pause the video and unpause it, let's see what you got. So domain, furthest left, this goes -7. Close dot. Domain is always X. Furthest right it goes 1. Closed 1. Piece of cake. Hopefully you got that. Range. Lowest point. That's down here. -5. Close dot. Range is always Y. Highest point it goes is right here. Close, and answer is 4. Okay? Students have the most trouble going through these, so if you need to pause the video, rewind it, and go back and practice some more, do so. By the way, these are called continuous graphs. Continuous means that you can see pretty much a picture. Okay, now let's go ahead and slide into the next set of types of graphs. Now, each table represents a relation. Determine the domain and the range. So again, but here our domain and range is easier because our domain are all of our x's and our range are all of our y's. So your domain is going to be -1, comma, 1, comma. Now, since there's 2 2s, you don't have to write them twice. You can write it once, and then there's a 7. There's a 7. By the way, because your 2 2s repeat, this is not a function. We don't want any extras to repeat. That's no good. And then our range are all the numbers in blue. 3 repeats, but you only have to write it once. -4, -7, and 4. Now, most of the time, your teacher will probably want you to write this in order from smallest to greatest. But for the sake of time, I'm not going to do that. But your range will be -7, -4, +3, +4. All right. Now, let's look at a different version of this. Now, let's look at all of our... Now, again, our domain is always X. So our domain is going to be this number, this number, this number, this number, and that number. So domain, -6, -4, 3. 5 repeats. You only have to write it once. Is this a function or no? And if you said not a function, you are correct. How do you know this is not a function? Because the 5s repeat. That's no good. And if you're wondering, but what about when the y's repeat? That doesn't even matter. We're only concerned with the x's. All right, so our range is going to be all the y values. That's this one, this one, this one, this one, and that one. So let's write down those numbers. -2, 5, 0, -6, -4. That is the range. And then again, if you want to reorder them from smallest to greatest, you can do so. But as long as you have all 5 of those numbers, you should be fine. Ask your teacher what they would prefer. Now, I have, on the next one, I have a set of points. How can I figure out what the domain of these points are? So for me, the first thing I would do is I would go ahead and label all of these A, B, C, D, E. Point A is where? -2, 7. Point B is where? 3, 5. Point C is where? 5, 7. Point D is at 5, -4. And point E is at 6, -2. And before I continue, I want you to tell me if you can determine so far if this is a domain, if this is a function or not. Looking at my points, and hopefully you said this is not a function. How can I tell? We're going to find out in just a minute. This is not a function. How can you tell? Well, again, remember our domain is all our x values. So we will write this out as -2, 3, 5. Since 5 repeats, we only have to write it once. 6. And then our range would be 7, 5. We already wrote 7. -4, -2. And that one was all messed up. All right, so that's how you determine the domain and the range when you have points. If you need to practice, rewind the video and watch it again. All right, so the last type we're going to do, and then we're going to do some practice start questions. The domain. By the way, pretend you don't see this. It literally says domain up there. Don't look. Close your eyes. Just kidding. All right, what's my domain? Again, it's all of these numbers. -5, -3, 1, 3, 4. This is my domain. Range are all of these numbers. -3, -2, 0, 3. And how can I tell if this is a function or not? Well, I'm going to look at all the little arrows right here. And if any of them have 2 that come from it, it is not a function. But this one is a function. Is a. And with that being said, let's go back to the top really quick and determine which of these are functions. Sorry, I forgot to check. So if I write F, that means it is a function. NF is not a function. What do you think for this one? Function, not a function. This is a function. How can you tell? Well, there's this thing called the vertical line test, which means that no matter where I draw a vertical line, it should only touch my picture once. So I can draw a vertical line here. It's only going to touch my line once. I can draw a vertical line here. It's only going to touch my line once. That is a function. Let's look at this one. Function or not a function? This one too is a function. Because no matter where I draw my vertical line, it's only going to touch once. Okay? Let's look at this next one. Function, not a function. This one again is a function. No matter where I draw my vertical line, it's only going to touch once. let's try number 4. Function or not a function. If I draw a vertical line, that is the whole line. That is no good. Not a function. Okay. Let's see this one. If I draw a vertical line anywhere, it only touches once. Function. And this one right here, if I draw a vertical line here, it touches once. But if I draw a vertical line right here, it touches twice. Not a function. Okay, now that we got through all that good stuff, we had some continuous graphs. These right here, when you have points, these are called discrete graphs. These are discrete. All right, now here are some questions from the previous STAR tests about domain and range. I'm going to show you how to answer these, and you don't really have to answer, you just have to know what you're looking for. So, which inequality best represents the domain? So, if it's asking for the domain, that means I have to have which letter? Hopefully, you said X, which means that Y can't be the answer, and this one can't be the answer. And then remember, domain is furthest left to right. And domain is on this -2 here with an open circle, which means that this one is my right answer. This one says +1. Nope, that's not what we're looking at. Furthest left. All right, that was an easy one. Let's do another one. Which graph represents the domain? Domain less than, or so we're looking at a couple of things equal to 6. So first off, I need to find the domain, and the domain, we're talking about X, and that X should have something associated with the 6. So let's look at this one. This dot is at 6. That could be an answer. This dot is at 6. That could be an answer. This dot is at -4. That can't be an answer. And then this dot is at +3. That can't be an answer. So it says, which graph best represents a domain less than? So less than are all the numbers to the left. Greater than will be all the numbers to the right. So less than means that A is our answer. Because all these numbers on this side are less than 6. If you were to go on this side, all these numbers on this side are greater than 6. Okay, so not this one. Let's do another one. Let's look at what this is talking about. Ooh, this is asking for the range. So if I'm looking for the range, this top line is your X, this bottom line is your Y, which means I'm going to look somewhere between this set of numbers. Okay? And remember, your range is your lowest point to your highest point. My lowest number is 0. My highest number is 7.66. Which means my ranges should be somewhere between 0 and 7.66. So that's what my answer should say. This is close, but not quite. F is close. G is not even near there. Oh, H it is, because it talks about equal. That's 0, 7.66. And then, let's do this one. Furthest left, domain, arrow. Furthest right, domain, is another arrow. So when you have 2 arrows, that's all real numbers for my domain. So it can't be this one. It can't be this one. Huh. And it can't be that one. The only other option is my answer is B, because I know that there are two arrows. Or you can also have done, okay, the lowest number on Y is 5. Y should have 5. You're like, okay. It could have been one of those two. That would have also canceled this one out and canceled this one out because they have these backwards. Okay? Here's another one. The domain. So we're looking at the domain. And remember, domain is furthest left to furthest right. Furthest left, X is this one, because these are your X numbers right here. Which number is furthest to the left? 0. Which number is furthest to the right? 230. But before we even get to that point, what numbers can we cancel if it's asking for the domain? We can cancel this one, and we can cancel this one. Why can we cancel those two? We can cancel those two because it has a Y in them. So now I have two options left. I have either F or J. My answer is going to be F. This right here is not even part of the domain because that is part of the range because that is a 6 and not a 0. So no good. That one goes away. Again, let's do another one. Furthest left on the domain is -7. Furthest right is 6. So let's look at my answers that have a domain furthest left is -7. So that's not this one. Possibly on the G. Can't be this one. And possibly J. Okay, we can do that. But let's see if we notice anything on the domain. These are closed circles. Closed circle, which means it should look something like this. -7, closed circle, X, closed circle, 6. Does G have that? Nope, it's missing the closed circles. So if you cross that one out, my only other option that might work is J. Okay? Or if you need to double check your work, what's the lowest point on J? -4 with a closed circle. What's the highest point? 5, closed circle. So that's J. All right, that is all the examples. That is all the notes. Everything that I've covered in this video will have you ready to take the state test, the STAR test, as far as the domain and range is concerned. All you have to do is know domain is furthest to the left to the furthest right, and then your range is lowest point to the highest point. If you have any questions, see me in class. Have a good one.